Hello everyone, Helen here. It's campervan time again. Yep, I'm going to take you off on another campervan trip today. This is our most recent one. We went to Scotland, to northeast Scotland, to a county called Aberdeenshire. And I just thought you would like to come along and see what we got up to. One of our reasons for wanting to go there was that we've got some friends who live there, and we last visited them 6 years ago. And when we went there, we thought what a beautiful area it was and that we must go back. You know how you say that, we must go back. And it's taken all this time, but at least we've been back and enjoyed lots of beautiful places, as well as managing to see our friends and spend a little bit of time with them too. So it was really nice. So no more chatter from me. Let's get on and go off on our trip to Scotland. So we set off heading northwards from where we live in Durham. And to give an idea of the scale, it's about 300 miles, which is about 480 kilometres from Durham to Aberdeen. And in fact, in Durham, we're roughly halfway between London and Aberdeen. We took a short stop just as we crossed the border into Scotland in a little town called Coldstream, where the border runs along the centre of the River Tweed. Coldstream is closely associated with a regiment called the Coldstream Guards, and that was actually formed in about 1650 and played a significant role in restoring King Charles II to the throne after Oliver Cromwell had been the Lord Protector for 5 years. Well, we continued on our way in not very pleasant weather. It was rather rainy and increasingly foggy, and we didn't really get much of a view as we drove around Edinburgh and then across the Firth of Forth on the Queen's Ferry crossing. It was also starting to get dark by then because we hadn't left home particularly early, and we decided to look for somewhere to stop for the night. We parked in a little place called Kinross and had a lovely meal at an Indian restaurant called Raj Mahal, and then we chose a little wooded car park just outside the town to stay in overnight. It was a really nice quiet spot and very close to the shores of Loch Leven, which apparently is the largest natural shallow body of water in lowland Britain, and it's a popular stopping place for thousands of wildfowl. And there's also a 13-mile heritage trail around the perimeter of the loch. So we set off from there the next morning, heading for the Cairngorms National Park, which is a mountainous region that's actually twice the size of the English Lake District, and apparently it's the same size as Luxembourg. It's the largest national park in the UK. It's quite a remote area and it's crossed by very few roads, and it is very beautiful. Unfortunately, the weather didn't oblige us with clear views, so you can't really see much of its stunning beauty on this particular trip. I'll have to go again, take you again. As we climbed higher into the mountains, there was a covering of snow and making it feel rather wintry, but we felt nice and cosy in the van. The main road through the Cairngorms, the A93, is often closed in adverse weather, and the area has been a popular place for skiing since about the 1930s. Through the other side of Glenshee, the snow disappeared and the rain stopped, and we soon arrived in the village of Braemar, which is in the heart of the Cairngorms National Park. Most of Braemar is now a conservation area, and it consists of lots of grand Victorian houses as well as small stone-built cottages, all surrounded by mountains. After a little wander round, we got back in the van and took a beautiful drive to an area that was a favourite with Queen Victoria when she used to come and spend time at Balmoral Castle each summer. We crossed the River Dee and parked near the Linn of Covie to eat our lunch. We had some warming soup and bread, and Pearl and Dean decided to go out for a little exploration while we were there. We went for a short stroll along by the River Covie, although we didn't go far enough to see the big bowl-shaped cavity in the ravine that's called the Punch Bowl. That was quite a bit further along the river, and we wanted to save our longer walk for the next place that we planned to visit. So we soon arrived at the Balmoral estate. The castle isn't open at this time of the year, so we'll have to save that for another time. And we set off on a rather muddy walk up a wooded hill, it was quite steep as well, to see a couple of cairns that were built in the time of Queen Victoria. On our way to the woods, we paused to look at some beautiful lichen on the fence of one of the estate cottages. It looks like it's been there quite a long time. And then we started our climb up the hill. There are actually 16 stone cairns on the Balmoral estate, built to commemorate various life events in the royal family. The majority of them were erected by Queen Victoria. The first cairn we came across was celebrating the marriage of one of Queen Victoria's daughters, Princess Beatrice, to Prince Henry of Battenberg. Quite a lot further up the hill, we were amazed when we saw the next cairn, which is actually a very large pyramid, right on top of the hill with beautiful views all around the estate. It was built in about 1878 to commemorate the death of Victoria's beloved husband, Prince Albert, who died in 1861. It just seemed rather surprising to be standing by a large stone pyramid in the middle of Scotland. But it was well worth the climb anyway. So that night we had a lovely time catching up with our friends, Helen and Andy, who live near the town of Huntly and who we hadn't seen since 2017. We appreciated a lovely roast dinner and spending the night in their guest room, and then the next day we set off for the North Aberdeenshire coast. Aberdeenshire has a very wide range of landscapes, probably a greater variety than any other Scottish county, and the area in the northern part is largely farmland and rolling countryside. We arrived at the coastal town of Cullen in sunshine, and that lasted for the rest of the day, so it was really nice. Driving under an impressive railway viaduct as we went through the town, where the trains ran until about the 1960s, I think. And we just enjoyed spending a bit of time watching the waves crashing on the shore. Although the sea wasn't particularly rough, the waves on the shore were quite big, and I just always love watching them crashing up against the sea wall. We spent a little bit of time exploring the centre of the town too, although it turns out that on Mondays, which is when we were there, not many places are open, which was rather a shame because there were some lovely little shops and cafes. It was interesting to note that the public toilets were labelled quines and loons, which are words that have been in use in Aberdeenshire for well over 400 years, and it comes from their local dialect, which is called Doric. Fortunately, the pictures helped us to go into the correct toilets. Otherwise, I don't know, we wouldn't have known where to go. After a short drive along the coast to a little place called Portnocky, we went to see a local landmark called Bow Fiddle Rock. It's a rock formation that supposedly resembles one end of a violin bow, and it actually looks quite delicate. It looks as though it might not survive a really big storm. And after that, we returned to Cullen to have some lunch. Now, Cullen at one time specialised in the export of smoked haddock. There used to be 3 large curing houses in the town, and it's here that they invented their local delicacy, Cullen Skink. So, of course, we were very keen to have some Cullen Skink in its place of origin. We took advantage of the lunch menu that was on offer at the Royal Oak Hotel, And when our Cullen Skink arrived, we definitely were not disappointed. It's basically a soup that contains smoked fish, potato, onions and milk, and it was really tasty. We enjoyed the rest of our meal there as well, and can recommend it as a good place to eat if you're ever in Cullen. In the afternoon, we decided to go for a Snowdrop walk, which our local friends had recommended to us. And it's a walk through the landscape gardens of Duff House, which is a Georgian mansion. There's also a very well preserved ice house in the grounds, built in 1790, where meat and fish and other provisions, dairy products and things could be preserved. Well, after that lovely walk, we headed to the town of Banff and enjoyed a peaceful time watching more waves. And in fact, we decided to stay there right by the sea overnight. It was a lovely quiet spot and very peaceful going to sleep with the soothing sound of the waves. After breakfast, we managed to get ourselves organised fairly promptly so as not to waste what proved to be another sunny day. Amazing, 2 sunny days in a row. And we set off from our overnight spot along the coast towards a place called Gardenstown, which is named after a laird called Alexander Garden, who had the village built in 1721 to provide homes for people who worked in the fishing industry. And it nestles into the side of a cliff, and the road winds down very steeply. It's a very windy road until you reach the harbour. So after cups of tea in the van, we set off for a walk from Gardenstown to go to a tiny 18th century fishing village called Crovie. So it's spelt Crovie, but you pronounce it Crovie. The walk hugs the base of the cliffs right next to the sea, and as we headed off, it didn't occur to us to think about what the tide was doing. And if you just notice here that there isn't actually much space between the rocks and the sea, but more of that later. We had a lovely walk, noticing the distant village of Crovie getting closer and closer, and just enjoying the sound of the waves crashing up onto the seashore. We thoroughly enjoyed wandering around the village, which was established in the first half of the 18th century by families who'd been made homeless by the Highland clearances. Their homes were tightly squeezed into the narrow strip of land between the cliffs and the sea, and the houses were built with the gable ends facing out to sea, with shuttered windows for keeping rough seas out of the house. It must have been quite scary at times when the sea was at its roughest, with waves probably washing right over the houses, and you might have been trapped inside the house for days, on really stormy times of the year. Otherwise, you'd be afraid of being washed away by the sea. I'm not even sure if I'd fancy hanging my washing out to dry right here. While we were there, we actually saw the waves wash right over this particular line of washing. The families who lived here made their living from fishing, and even the women helped out, catching mackerel on long lines thrown out from the shore. However, in the Great Storm of 1953, which hit a large part of the east coast of the UK with great severity and a lot of loss of life, many houses and other buildings in Crovie were damaged or destroyed, and many residents just left the village permanently. It ceased to be a fishing village then, and nowadays the houses are all used as holiday cottages. The Great Storm also washed away the path between Crovie and Gardenstown, and this did come into my mind as we headed back along the path towards the van, especially when we found that waves had started washing over the footpath. Well, we managed to dodge the waves without getting wet, but when we rounded the final corner, we realised that the final stretch to get back to the van had been barred by the incoming tide. The beach that we'd crossed earlier was rapidly being covered by the waves, and you can just see our van over on the right there being splashed by waves that were crashing against the seawall. We had no choice but to turn back and find an alternative route back to the van. Although I confess to having grumbled a bit about retracing our footsteps and then climbing the steep road out of the village, the very steep road, we were rewarded with some lovely views down onto the cottages in Crovie, and then when we found a footpath along the top of the cliffs that would take us back to Gardenstown, we were treated to beautiful views across the sea to the village, and I soon forgot about my complaints about our unplanned detour and started enjoying myself. So back at the van, the tide was right in, and this is what the start of our walk looked like when we got back. And waves were crashing over the sea wall as well, which was quite exciting. Although this was a fairly calm day, so maybe I wouldn't find it so exciting on a really stormy day. We headed further along the coast to spend the afternoon at an RSPB nature reserve at Troop Head. And as it was Shrove Tuesday, we'd come prepared for making the traditional pancakes, although I have to say we don't usually have square pancakes. But we thought we'd have a go at making them in the little ridge monkey pan, because it maybe isn't the best idea to try flipping pancakes in a camper van, especially when the roof is down. They turned out okay. Flipping in the pan worked well, and although I hadn't taken a whisk, so the pancakes weren't quite as light and airy as usual. But they were nice anyway. We enjoyed them all the same, and just with sugar and lemon, and we were extra happy that it was mild enough to sit with the van door open while we ate. That was a real treat. We had a lovely stroll around the nature reserve, although we didn't spot anything other than a few of the usual gulls. Phil walked a bit further over the hill and spotted some gannets, but the coastline looked wonderful in the sunshine and the sea air was very refreshing, so it was just nice to be out there with great views along the coastline. There was just enough daylight left to visit another 18th century fishing village called Pennan, where, not surprisingly, the residents were also dependent on the sea for their livelihood. And it's also a place that was used as a setting for the film Local Hero, if you know that film. We headed up the steep road out of the village and onwards to look for our overnight spot. And that night we stopped by an old dovecot called the Hooley Mount Dovecot, near a little place called Rose Hearty, just off the coastal road, and we found it to be a very peaceful place to spend our last night. And the next morning we headed south out towards Aberdeen, where Phil dropped me off and I went off to meet my friend Margaret, and Phil went off home because he had to go back to work. But I'll tell you a bit more about the Aberdeen trip another time. I'm going to leave it there for today, and hope you've enjoyed coming along with us, and I will see you again very soon. So take care and keep nice and busy, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.